All right, Ben, the Book of Ecclesiastes. This book is written by the preacher, or it could be translated the convener. The word means someone who calls an assembly, or presumably gathers an assembly to speak to the assembly. So preacher, maybe not exactly the way we think of preacher today, but similar. And it says right out of the gate that this preacher is going to talk to you about the fact that everything in life that anyone can ever pursue is meaningless. It's worthless. Right there, Ecclesiastes 1, verse 2, and I'm reading from the ESV. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. So vanity is there 5 times.
Yeah. Useless.
In just one
Worthless.
sentence. Right. So vanity, the word means empty, futile, meaningless, void.
It's almost, is it like a wind? Like I've heard it's just like...
Yes, it's based on, it's the Hebrew word for vapor.
Yeah, vapor.
Or breath.
Yeah. Yep.
Actually, it's the name for Abel,
whose life
was
is
here
a breath.
and he was gone.
Yeah.
Right? So what is meaningless? Everything.
No.
Everything under the sun is meaningless. So
And he names a lot of stuff.
there's a lot of things. He
meaningless.
goes through many things to establish his case that there's nothing that in and of itself has value or meaning or purpose. It's futile. It's empty. So he talks about how life is cyclical with no real end or change or updates. So to point at that, he looks at nature. The wind comes, the wind goes. The sun comes up, the sun goes down. Water streams into the oceans evaporate into clouds, the clouds rain down into streams, and then back into the ocean.
Yep.
So cycles, repetition, things that keep going but don't really end. They don't really culminate in anything. There's no real advancement or progress. And even if you think man has made progress, he goes, no, everything that is being done now has already been done.
Yep.
So even if you can point to advancements in technology, let's say, he's going to say technology to do what? To do the same thing. So I didn't have this in the notes, but we think about, we live in an age of distraction. We have so much tech around us, we're distracted. Were they not distracted before technology? Of course they were. We will always find ways to not pay attention to the things
technology didn't make humans distractible. Humans are always distractible.
Exactly. So he talks about how history goes in cycles as well. There's war to attain peace, and peace, we find new reasons to go to war. What has been is what will be, and what has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. You might say, well, maybe it's about what you learn through those cycles. It's the more you know.
Yeah.
And he says, no, there's really never an end to learning. You can never really learn enough. It doesn't matter how many books you read. There's still another book. There's still a fact you're missing. You just can't plumb the depths of it. What about pleasure? Maybe the point is just have fun while you're doing it, man. We're here short. Life is a breath. It's a vapor. At least have fun with it.
Right.
He goes, for what? The fun doesn't fulfill you either. And he goes, trust me, I tried all of it. What about work? Maybe it's just your duty. While you're here, put in the work you're supposed to do. He says, for what?
Yeah.
You put in your work, you work, and then you die, and then someone takes over.
Yeah.
What's the point of that? So it's bleak. It's riveting in how it grabs you and it pushes your face right into these stark realities. Yeah. For instance, he says in chapter 7, it's better to go to a funeral than a feast. And you might think, boy, this guy was a really fun guy to be around.
That's right.
But he's on a mission here
Yeah.
in what he's writing. But why is it better to go to a funeral than a feast? And the answer to that, I think, is the same answer as to why it's better to read Ecclesiastes than to ignore it, even though it's difficult. It's better to go to a funeral than to a feast, he says, because at the funeral you realize that this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. In other words, at a feast, you're not thinking about death or what's coming or what's meaningful or what's the purpose of life. You're just eating dip and dessert and you're drinking and whatever else. The funeral forces you to grapple with the real question of the meaning of life. And that's what he's trying to do in the book. Ecclesiastes is trying to force you to wrestle with that same question. What brings meaning to your life? Whatever your answer to that is, he goes, no, that can't be the answer because that's vanity, that's meaningless. And let me tell you why, X, Y, Z. Is there any meaning to life? Yes, there is. So here's the thesis of the book that you may not get right out of the gate, but if you dwell on Ecclesiastes, spend time in it, I think you'll see that the thesis of the book is something like this. The wise motivation for all that we do is to do them unto God in obedience, because God will bring everything into judgment. That's what matters.
Yep.
It's not the doing of the thing itself. It's doing it with God as your audience and knowing that at some point you will give account to God with regard to what you did with that work, with that pleasure, in those seasons, in this time of peace or in the time of war. Everything that you do is under God's watch. And even the good things, he watches those too. Even if no one gave you praise for it, it still mattered that you did the good thing because he saw it. Mm-hmm. All right, so here are some themes really quickly. He talks about these areas of life that outside of God have no meaning and only have meaning if God is the audience. So pleasure. He's not against pleasure, but pleasure has to be experienced and enjoyed within the bounds of what God approves.
Right.
Because he's watching. Work. Why should we work hard if we're just going to die and someone else has to take over? Because we work unto the Lord and we put in our time because he's our audience. Education, how we enjoy nature, the cyclical nature of life, the fact that things just keep coming around and around and around, that's okay. The purpose that we find in life is not to break out of cycles. It's that within the part that we play within those cycles, we do it unto the glory of God. So I just have one tip really with reading Ecclesiastes. Read it understanding that he doesn't mean everything is meaningless. What he means is everything is meaningless without God.
Yeah.
That's the point. So as you're reading through, there's no need to feel depressed if you have a relationship with God. But if you don't have a relationship with God, you have every reason to feel actually quite depressed, in his opinion.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of as you were walking through the book, that it feels like this could be, maybe we should try to use this book evangelistically even. Maybe, you know somebody who, I mean, the question of what is the meaning of life, what's the purpose of the things I'm doing, that's a question every human being has.
Right.
And this could be a way, if you have a good friend, maybe not the first book you would suggest to a non-Christian, but you have a friend who really places their meaning in one certain thing. Maybe read Ecclesiastes with them and try to, burst their bubble a little bit. Think about it, man. This thing's useless.
Yeah.
It all's going to go away. What is meaningful?
Right.
And that's doing it for God.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He wants to press the reader into that corner.
Yep.
And when you say uncle, you give up. You're like, all right, I give up. I guess life is meaningless. He goes, but it's for God.
Yep.
And that's what makes it meaningful.
Yep.
And actually, you don't have to wait till the last verse to see that. It is hinted throughout. He's got
glimpses
little
of hope.
glimpses of it throughout.
Yeah.
So watch out for those, and those are going to be encouraging. Ties to Christ. I think the most direct connection to Christ is in the final two verses.
Yep.
So chapter 12, 13 and 14, those are the last two verses. Again, I'm reading from the ESV. The end of the matter. He's like, all right, after everything I've written, here it is. All has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. So the natural question is, how do I do that?
Yeah.
Right? How do I live my life with God watching me so that when I give a report, I get an A? I pass. How do I do that? Will I pass that judgment? Will my good simply outweigh my evil? Or does God just turn away from evil and only pay attention to my good? Well, that's not what the verse says. The verse says he sees everything, including the evil. So those can't be correct. Even by Old Testament standards, those can't be the right answers.
Right.
So it's impossible to read this as a Christian and not pretend to know the answer, or to pretend not to know the answer, right? It's the gospel of Jesus Christ, the good news that there is a way to live this life, and even though we have a mixture of good and evil deeds, there's a way to pass that judgment in the end, and that's if I don't submit my grade, but I submit Christ's grade on my behalf, and that he takes my failed grade on himself. That's the good news, and I think if you read Ecclesiastes with that in mind, it actually goes from depressing to encouraging.
Right.
Takeaways, I just think if you think about each of these topics and you think about your life, you can ask yourself, how can I better obey the Lord in these areas? How can I approach education in a way where it's meaningful? How can I enjoy pleasure in a way where I'm worshiping God in it?
Yeah.
Just for a couple of examples. And so how can we go from doing them in meaningless ways to doing them in eternally significant ways? Because he's not against nature. He's not against education or work, right? It's doing those things in the proper perspective. And we might need a check, with regard to how we view some of those things that might be imbalanced, or maybe we're not doing them in a way where we're consciously aware of the fact that God is a primary audience as I do them.
And ironically, this bleak, kind of unencouraging seeming book could also be an encouragement to us if we are feeling like life is meaningless. Like if you're in a job, for example, and you're just, what am I doing here? What's the point? This is meaningless.
I just feel like a drone.
I just feel like I'm doing nothing.
Right.
Then Ecclesiastes goes, you're right, except now you need to reorient yourself and figure out how you're actually going to do this for the glory of God, because it is meaningful and when it's done for Christ.
Right.
And so it's kind of almost counterintuitive when you read it. You're like, oh, wow, that's bleak. But if you're feeling bleak, this gives you hope. Okay, there is a way for there to be meaning in what I'm doing.
Yeah, your job might be the most mundane job, but it's not mundane to God.
Yep.
And so that it just injects your life with
purpose,
a kind of meaning and purpose
that we all need.
It can't be had anywhere else.
Yeah.
Amen.